Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. I have a great group of guests with me today. They wrote a book, and it's a fantastic one. It's called Ghosts of Groton Bank. That time of year, perfect. So first up, Hallie Keeler is joining us, one of the authors of the book. First time on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate asking us.
So you're just sitting around one day, and you said, you know what, I want to write a book about ghosts locally, right? Is that how it happened?
Not quite.
Okay.
We had, and some of the others will talk about it, but a number of us from some of the historical organizations in the neighborhood we're talking, and as you know, we talk about old historic things, the subject of ghosts comes up, and one of them got the idea of, well, we should do ghost tours. So we did that, and that was a lot of fun. And then I happened to be at a trade show. I'm a retired librarian, and I was at a trade show, and I came across the History Press booth, and they had books from this series, Haunted America. And I was looking at them, and I thought, oh, we've got a story. So I talked to the representative, and I talked to my friends, and next thing you know, we have Ghosts of Groton Bank.
And here it is.
And here it is.
Were you, before it all happened, what was your stance on ghosts? Were you a believer? Would you consider yourself sensitive to their presence?
I'm as sensitive as a rock.
Oh, so
I have no sensitivity, but I've had experiences growing up that I can't explain. And I'm very open-minded. I feel that we absolutely can't know everything. There's just way too much out there, and we have to keep an open mind. And some of the stories that we've come across, there are no other explanations that I can come up with, no rational explanation. So it makes for a good story.
Your contribution to the book, tell me about that.
Well, I wrote a lot of sections of the book. So, you know, the foreword, the introduction, put a lot of my own personal experiences in there. But the one that is probably the most interesting is Bill Memorial Library in the city of Groton. I was there for 35 years. I was the director. And people would come in and say, because it's an old building, 1890, and they'd say, well, is this place haunted? And I'd say, well, not that I know of. And come to find out, after we got the ideas to do these ghost tours, we brought in for several of our sites the Thames Society of Paranormal Investigations. And they did an investigation, and lo and behold, they found a lot of paranormal activity in the building. So I was surprised, even though there were occasions when things happened in the library that I couldn't explain. Most particularly, over the course of a number of years, I would smell pipe smoke. And I'd walk out of my office and ask the rest of my coworkers if they smelled pipe smoke, and occasionally they would. The investigators also sensed smoke. Smelled some smoke.
And they bring their equipment and everything,
too. Oh, yeah, they've got very sensitive equipment set up all over, just like you see on television.
Right.
And after I left the library, the woman who replaced me walked out of the office one day and said to the staff, does anybody smell smoke? So it wasn't just me.
You weren't imagining it.
I wasn't imagining it, because you know, there are auditory hallucinations and that kind of things, and smell. But this was a very common experience among those of us who were working at the library and the paranormal investigators.
You know, all the ghost investigative shows that are on TV, obviously they're doing it because it gets good ratings and that's what they want, but it also shows that there's an appetite for it and that people believe and they want to believe, so that's why all these shows are on and successful, right?
That's right. There is a plethora of books out there. That I think the Haunted America series has dozens and dozens of titles, because every town, every person has its own story, and it is popular now. That's one thing people have asked us, well, were these ghosts around 100 years ago? And they may have been, and people may have experienced things, but either it wasn't important enough, or they didn't want to talk about it. It just seems to be the time now that everyone is talking about it and writing books.
And I think also there might be a misconception that if a place has a presence, that maybe somebody had to have died in there or something like that.
Right.
But that is not necessarily the case, right?
Not in my experience. The house I live in had 2 people die in it, and it's the quietest house I've ever lived in.
Right.
And no one's died in the library.
Right.
But yet they had the impression that there was a man and 2 women there who may have been Mr. Bill, who gave the library, possibly his 2 wives. They're all buried out in the backyard. Or it could have been other people. You know, they didn't identify them, though that was their likely conclusion.
Being a librarian, did that give you a sort of a heads up sort of a view of your ability to write a book in the first place? And what's it like to publish a book these days?
Well, actually, this isn't my first book.
Okay, so you've got experience in
Right,
it. Then,
right. This was different, but I write textbooks also. I teach in a paraprofessional library program for 3 Rivers, and it's a certificate program. And I'm working with a colleague to write the textbooks for the program. And I've got one already out and the other coming out in a couple of months.
Excellent.
So this was easier.
Right.
Because I'd already been through the process.
And what about when you're collaborating with other authors that we'll have on in the next segments? Just kind of pooling your ideas and just you're sharing thoughts together? Yeah.
Actually, we all had our own assignments.
Okay.
We each had our sites or our experiences, and they gave their materials to me. I was the point of contact, and I organized it and sent it off in the format. They didn't have to deal with the minutia of format and photographs. They left that to me.
Well, you're you're the professional.
Oh,
That's why.
absolutely.
So, in your opinion, your experiences, and you admit that you're not sensitive to it, but a ghost doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It doesn't mean haunted, boo. It could just be they exist alongside us. Right?
That's the theory, that people who are, for whatever reason, are still with us, and they coexist. They can coexist. Some of the stories in the book talk about people who have told off the ghosts in their house and just say, "I live here."
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah,
get used
out.
to it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're just, again, I don't have this experience,
Right.
but people do have the experience that they're just benevolent presences. I've heard of people who had negative experiences, but not personally. I've read of things, but I've never had that. And none of the people in our book have.
All right. Fascinating. Hallie Keeler, thank you for your contribution, and keep up with the writing, because just this alone, it's fantastic, so thank you. We're going to take a short break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay there. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. The book we are discussing today, Ghosts of Groton Bank. One of the 3 authors, David Rose, has joined me now. Welcome to the show, sir.
Oh, thank you for having us.
One of the things we should mention right off the bat is Ghosts of Groton Bank. It's not a bank, actually, right?
No, it isn't.
How did it get this name?
Okay. Well, the Groton Bank was given based on the population where they lived at the time, which was right along pretty much the bank of the Thames River. It encompasses an area from Thames Street up to Smith Street and from Baker Avenue to Broad Street. And that was set by the Historical Society. It wasn't set by any of us. And it was called the Groton Bank, basically, because it was on the bank of the river.
Now, the question I asked in the first segment and off the air, would you consider yourself sensitive, or would you consider yourself just a regular person?
I'm not sensitive at all.
No?
No, I've never had any experiences.
Okay. But you did contribute to this book, and we're going to talk about the fort most of all in your segment. Tell me about the fort.
Well, the fort, when we first started talking about doing the ghost tours, I did some investigations. I did some research because, I've heard stories, but I wanted to get something more. So I did some research, and I found a book called The Ghosts of New England by David Pitkin. And he was asked to come up and check out some strange occurrences at the fort. And so based on his investigation, it's pretty clear to me that there's something going on there. One of the examples was after he looked into all the complaints that this gentleman asked him to come up and review, he decided he needed to take a walk over into the fort and take a look at that. And he walked around and he examined the earthworks, and he wanted to find out where Colonel Edgewood was killed. He found the stone inside the fence. And he walked down towards the Sally Port, which is a tunnel under the south wall. And he's leaving the fort, and he's thinking to himself, that there's definitely spirits here, but I wonder if most of them or all of them have left. And he heard a voice say behind him, "You'd be a fool to think so." He turned around, there was nobody there.
Wow.
And he never said that out loud. He got to answer the question. He was thinking.
Oh, so it was in his mind.
It was in his mind that he was thinking, I wonder if they've all left. And this voice from nowhere said, you'd be a fool to think so.
Wow.
So that kind of piqued my interest. And then, you know, we went around asking people for their experiences. And one of them that I can relate was my stepson. When he was a teenager, was sitting in the fort with a couple of his friends at night, sitting up on the ramparts, watching the river. And all of a sudden, all three of them at the same time felt something brush the back of their heads. And they all turned around, and there's nothing there. And they got out of the fort as fast as they could, and it took them a long time to go back in there at night, even though you're not supposed to be there.
Oh, kids, right?
But
And by the
kids.
way, we're talking about Fort Trumbull, correct?
No, we're Fort
Griswold.
Fort Griswold
Fort
in
Griswold,
Groton.
right. I want to make sure, because we started out just saying the fort, and I need to know
Yes.
which fort we're talking about.
Fort Griswold.
Now, when he came in and did the investigating, what was it like? Does he bring in all the electronic equipment, or does he investigate a different way?
He investigates a different way. He just came up by himself. But what he does, he uses meditation before he goes to the site and tries to put himself in that place in that time. And he did have a couple of revelations, sites that actually worked out, although they were, in one case it was the wrong person. In his vision, in his meditation, he saw Mother Bailey, but it wasn't really Mother Bailey that he was seeing. It was Mrs. Latham, who was looking for her husband and son. But he did see Mother. The appearance he saw was actually Mother Bailey, but Mother Bailey was a young child at the time. And the picture he saw in the museum was what he saw in his, while he was meditating.
Wow, wow.
So it was strange.
Your opinion, why do they hang around?
Well, again, I relied on David Pitkin's book, and the reasons that they gave is there's a love for a person that they can't leave, or a love for a place that they can't leave, or as in a lot of cases, and especially around battlegrounds, it's because of something horrendous happened. And the person, the spirit can't understand what happened, and trying to make sense of it, and they hang around and try to make sense of what happened, and they find that quite a lot around battlefields.
Wow. And do you think they ever find their way if they're lost, or is it an eternal thing?
Well, if they're still here 100 and some years after the battle,
Yeah.
some may have, but some clearly haven't.
Are there a lot of sightseers and people just because of the hype of just using the word ghost, they want to just go and try to experience it and be a part of it?
Well, I don't think there's been that much hype yet. I mean, the book just came out.
Maybe it will.
It
Yeah,
was history.
yeah.
For the most part, people came around because of the history.
Right.
You know, and I will walk around. I walk my dog because I live right in the neighborhood, and if I see people reading signs there, I'll ask them if they know about the battle. And if they say no, I'll ask them, would you like to hear it? If you got 10, 15 minutes, I can tell you about the battle.
And does the ghost stuff get intertwined into the story? No, okay.
I didn't put the ghost stuff in. I just talk about the battle.
Right.
Um,
But if
I
you
might
put
have
two
to
and two
later.
together, yeah,
I
you
might
know.
have to later.
Right. And have you heard from other people that have had experiences?
Well, I actually witnessed one. I didn't have any experience with it, but I witnessed it. We were doing it, the Friends of Fort Griswold was doing a candlelight vigil to honor the 88 men that were killed during the battle. And we would light 88 luminaries, call off the names, and then extinguish the candle. And that really had people see that, you know, this was 88 people that died.
Yeah.
But as we were doing that, when we do it at sunset, the sun's setting, it's getting dark, and all of a sudden this chill breeze came across. And I watched people looking around as if they're sensing somebody there. And as I talked to them afterwards, they were. Wow. They were sensing people there.
Wow. If you were thinking something in your mind and had a question and you heard an answer to that question with nobody being there, what would your reaction be?
Yeah, where did they come from?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Where the heck did that come from? But, you know, so I did see, I didn't feel anything.
Right.
But I did see that people in there were seeing it.
As a regular guy, not necessarily sensitive, there is something to it. There is something beyond
I feel
something
there is.
beyond death.
Yes, I definitely feel there is.
Excellent. David Rose, a contributor to Ghosts of Groton Bank. And by the way, you can get this Amazon.com. Once Fort Griswold's open, you'll be able to get it there
They'll
eventually.
be able to buy it there also, but you can also get it at Books A Million and the bank.
Right.
Banks Bank Square Bookstore in Mystic.
Might be at the Groton Public Library, too. It's
They
possible.
may have some left, yes, they were selling them.
David Rose, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, another short break, and we'll come right back. This is For the Record. Stay right there. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. The book is called Ghosts of Groton Bank, and our third author is on, Leslie Evans. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Sean. Fun to be here.
What's it like to be an author?
Well, it's for me, it's fun. I'm a historian, and I'm a historic house museum person. So I enjoy historic research a lot. But doing research to write a book like this was a first experience for me. And I found it very interesting. It was fun to try and put together those stories, some of them folklore, some of them oral history that's from our own time period, and try to put it together into a cohesive document was a bit of a challenge.
Do you think it's easier to collaborate with others for a book, or maybe to just do one on your own with all the information?
It's hard to say. I suppose it would depend on the subject matter, but for this book it was fun to collaborate with
Right.
other people who I might have a clear interest, say, in the Avery Cop House where I work, and in the Mother Bailey House where David Rose is passionate about Fort Griswold, and Hallie Keeler worked for a quarter of a century caring for the Bill Library, and so she knew that building inside out, and was wonderful to have her take responsibility for that part of it. So
Well,
I think it was a good collaboration.
They're all local, they're all in the same general area, and it makes sense for them to all be in the same book, talking about the same subject matter, right?
They are. The
Yeah.
neighborhood is actually called Groton Bank because it is a riverbank neighborhood, and sometime used to be called Groton Heights. Not so much referred that way anymore. Those are more historic names for it, but that neighborhood, all the sites that we have here are within walking distance of each other, some of them very close to each other.
Do you, as an historian yourself, find yourself veering away from the ghost aspect of it and just wanting to talk about the history of the location?
No, I think you cannot separate the two. I think for me and anybody who has spent any time at all working in historic houses, not just the Avery Cop House, but other places I've worked and colleagues who have experienced many of them, anybody who's spent time in a place like that can't help but feel that presence of the past that's there. And
The energy?
It's almost a tangible energy, yes, I would call it that, a feeling of the people who came before. A lot of these houses are from a time period when people would be born at home and they would live their whole life maybe in that house. Maybe they got married there, they might die there. Their funeral would be held from there.
They'd probably be buried in the yard?
Yeah, well, if not in the yard, within walking distance of the house. And so all the milestones of their life, of many people's lives, generation after generation, might have taken place within those walls. And so I think it's maybe not a far-fetched thing to imagine that there's something of them that remains there. And you come to be able to feel it.
But do you feel that way more knowing of the history of the place? Like if you didn't, would you still get that sense? Would you feel?
No, I think some people, perhaps there are people who are so sensitive to that kind of thing that they
Right.
can just enter a room where they've never been and seem to be able to evaluate it, whether there's a presence
activity
there or
here.
not. Yes, I am not like that.
Okay, so you don't consider yourself sensitive?
Not
then?
in that regard.
Okay.
For me, I have to spend time in a place and get to know it myself, and you gradually, I guess you start to assimilate the feeling of the place. And the more you learn about the people who lived there before us, you almost feel like you get to know them, even though they might have died 100 years before I was born.
It might be difficult to relate.
Yeah, you still might call them Joe or
Right.
whatever their name was, and you get to know them. I feel that when I'm in a place like this, and you could just almost feel what daily life was like going on around you.
It would almost be interesting to, or even maybe a little difficult to communicate with someone, even though they speak the English language. If you're going so far back, the English is a little different back in the beginning than it is now.
It was. People's values were different, the way
Yeah.
they looked at the world, the knowledge they had. You know, we understand a lot of things now about medicine, about science, and so on, that people just didn't have the awareness of 100 years ago.
Everything
200
was like
years
the
ago.
evil and. you
Well,
know.
it was scary.
Yeah.
You know, there were a lot of diseases. People didn't know what caused them. There were, plagues would happen, or just unexplainable circumstances that people seem to need to be able to explain so they can understand them and hopefully prevent them. And a lot of superstitions evolved around that.
So you say that when you go into a place, you sort of assimilate yourself into it. But were you, before it all started, were you a believer, or what was your take on life after death?
I'm very open-minded about it. I feel like these kinds of stories, ghost stories, if you will, have occurred across time through all kinds of different societies and different cultures. It's just such a pervasive element in the human experience that I think for me to say it's not so, I would never think to do that. But I do feel very open-minded about it. As Hallie said earlier, there's a lot that we can't explain, a lot we can't understand.
Tell me about your contributions to the book, your specific places that you were mentioning.
Well, my chapters in the book are about the Avery Cop Museum, where I work, and the Mother Bailey House, which is just down the street. Both of them historic house museums built about 1800 or a little after, so they're about 200 years old. The Avery Cop House was lived in by 6 generations of the same family, passed down from generation to generation with all the contents of the house intact. So it is really like a time capsule of family life from one generation to the next.
And obviously people have passed away.
Oh, yes. And people were born there, people died there, weddings were held there, funerals were held there. It was a house where everything, all elements of life happened there. And people lived there from just after the Revolutionary War right up until the last person living there was in the 1990s. So it experienced a huge spectrum of life and is a very interesting house to visit. The time period that we focus on for museum interpretation is about 1890 to 1930. And during that time period, not only did the Cop family live there, Mr. and Mrs. Cop and their 3 children, but also their household help. They had live-in servants that were Irish immigrant women, and we tell their story too, and some of the ghost stories we have revolve around them as well. So it's not just the people who owned the house. There were other people that lived there that were necessary for the house to be able to function the way it did.
When people come to visit and want to learn about the place, are there a lot of people now, especially if they know that there's the potential for ghosts? Is that what they focus on?
Some people do, especially with the proliferation of kind of ghost hunting television shows. That's really increased. We don't at all try and promote the house like a haunted house to visit, but sometimes that's really what somebody's interest is, and they'll want to talk about that, and we're willing to talk about it with them. But
they may not necessarily experience anything.
Yeah, they're not going to.
Yeah.
I really don't. One thing I don't think is that ghosts will just come out to order. Just
hey,
because,
there's people here. I guess I'll come.
Just because someone wants them to, or because somebody sets up some equipment to detect them. I don't know how much I really think that you can call them out like that.
Right.
But they're there. There's some kind of presence there.
And like we mentioned in another segment, those shows are so popular, so there's an appetite for it.
There's a tremendous appetite. It seems almost an insatiable one.
Yes.
And the shows really do seem to run the gamut from just extremely sensational to...
Right, they want things flying across the room.
Conscientious, really scientific investigation. The investigative team that came to the Avery Cop House and to the Bill Memorial Library and the Mother Bailey House were very ethical and respectful, which is why we allowed them to come there.
What is an unethical? Just kind of going for the ratings kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think just trying to go in and be sensational and making things up if they didn't happen to find anything, just wanting to have something exciting to say or to commercialize that aspect of life, I think.
Sounds good. Well, fascinating. Leslie Evans, we appreciate your contributions and all the authors' contributions to Ghosts of Groton Bank. And we mentioned again, Amazon.com, one of the places, and there's some local places, right?
There are. You can actually get a copy right at the Avery Cop House Museum. The local libraries are stocking it, and Bank Square Books, an independent bookstore in Mystic, has it.
All right.
So it's readily available.
Leslie Evans, thanks for your contribution. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. Until next time, I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Take care.